ain't real shit anymore.
You have to have these difficult conversations.
So the movement is about equality.
In order for Black Americans,
that was a really intense debate.
Let's just keep it strictly about facts and we'll be good.
I mean, this is a verbal fight. I mean,
It is.
We invite you to be a part of the league and participate in actually debating.
Can you hear me now?
Hello, Great Debate League. My name is Ebony Johnson, and I will be your moderator and host for this evening. We are anticipating a vigorous exchange of facts and ideas that will elevate our points of view. I hope that you can stay with us until the end as we rely on your votes to determine who is the greater debater. Tonight's premise: welfare state policies have eroded the African American family. Debating the affirmative position, Kimani White. From Trenton, New Jersey, Kimani studied biology in undergraduate school and is a member of the World Socionic Society. Debating the negative position, Jony Espinal. From Paterson, New Jersey, and is the editor-in-chief and founder at United States of Anonymous, an umbrella of cyber and technology journalism. Tonight's guiding definitions: welfare state, a system whereby the government undertakes to protect the health and well-being of its citizens, especially those in financial or social need, by means of grants, pensions, and other benefits. Policies, a course or principle of action adopted or proposed by a government, party, business, or individual. Erode, to diminish or destroy by degrees. Family, a group of one or more parents and their children living together as a unit. This is an unranked debate. There will be no personal attacks of any kind, no profanity, and no interrupting. Both participants are allowed to call a fact-check timeout only during one of their designated speaking times. We will now begin round one, opening statements. Each participant will provide an uninterrupted opening statement. We will begin with Kimani White, arguing the affirmative. Kimani, you have 3 minutes.
Yes, my position is the affirmative, that welfare state policies have eroded African American family units by basically financially incentivizing single parenthood, and as a result, have adversely affected the socioeconomic prospect of Black communities that have since become dependent on such programs. The breakdown of Black family units and the generations following the implementation of these policies have contributed not only to a lack of upward economic mobility for many, but also increased rates of violent crime and mental health issues. Welfare state policies in general have been big factors in poor communities across the board, but have disproportionately affected Black American communities that were already relatively poor during the Great Society programs that took effect back in the mid-1960s. So since then, illegitimacy rates of children have been going up, like children born out of wedlock. I believe back during the time when the policies were first implemented, the birth rate of in the Black community out of wedlock was about 21%. By 2017, the figure had been rising to about 77 or 80%, depending on which municipalities you're going by. I also have plenty of other data and statistics showing the how basically the structure of family units are the single biggest determining factor and how children in a particular neighborhood will turn out economically or even like the levels of crime. So that's about all I have for my opening statement right now.
All right. And now for Jony Espinal, arguing the negative. Jony, you have 3 minutes. Jony, unmute yourself, please, so that we can hear your opening statement. We'll bring you in. Thank you.
Hello? All right. So there's one thing in political discourse that just ignites a fire in me more than anything else. And it's just a distortion and erasure of the recent history that's led to the continued segregation of people in my community and those communities of many others in America. This is the pillar upon which my worldview stands. Were it not for my being raised in an environment where my reality differed from what the TV told me reality was, I might have remained oblivious to the fractal-like practices that are used to leech wealth on all scales around the world. One of the silliest claims in my life that I've had to refute for nearly 2 decades is the incessant right-wing claim that welfare destroyed the Black family. I view welfare in 2 ways. I view welfare in food stamps and subsidized housing. Those are the major welfare programs in the US. There's also some medical stuff, but really the major push was food stamps and housing, and that's what I'm going to be talking about the most. Clearly, these folks have been living in La La Land. The Black man was literally torn from his home by the police. The day Richard Nixon became president, 1969, January 20th, that's when Black incarceration started skyrocketing. Okay, when Richard Nixon became president, you can see the fucking, it's off the chart. I'm sorry. This is real history, people. African Americans have always gotten the short end of the stick when it comes to welfare. Those policies that were presented in the 1960s for welfare, those housing policies, built suburban subsidized housing, low-income housing, a little more distributed, a little more spaced out. And African Americans were given the projects of the 1960s, of the 1930s. Those project buildings were from the previous welfare programs. Now, okay, that's all I got to say.
You actually have a minute left. That's just your minute warning, Jony. So if you do want to use your 60 seconds, you can. That was just your 1 minute warning.
No, it's fine.
All right. All right. Well, thank you for those opening statements, gentlemen. We will now begin round 2. This is the lightning round, which allows for an open cross-examination between both participants to engage in an interrogation of their opponent's position. This is a shared time frame for both debaters. Audience, please listen carefully and pose your questions for our debaters in the comments, as audience Q&A is the next round. This round is 15 minutes. Debaters, you may begin.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, Jony, do you have any data kind of to back up that welfare state policies haven't adversely affected Black communities or Black families since they were instituted back in the mid-60s?
It's a broad statement. It's a broad question. I have charts to show exactly when the Black man was taken from the family, when incarceration began, and that's ultimately literally the Black family being destroyed, the head of the house being removed from the family. If you want, I can give you some of my arguments of what really took the Black man out of the household. Not only was it the war on drugs, not only was it just criminalizing Black behavior. There was this book by Ray Bradbury called The Pedestrian. It's a science fiction book, just a man walking down the street and some robot police officer of the future just arrest the guy because it's just weird that a man is walking in the street. This happens to Black men all the time, and it happened a lot more back then. And like I said, there was even the welfare that was given to the African American community was like the short end of the stick. They built all these real like the original welfare programs of the 30s. The projects, when they built the projects, I grew up across from from the Alabama projects in New Jersey, and there were originally white people there, and it was real nice. And then again, when Richard Nixon became president, he really drastically cut funding for housing. All the white people left, all the jobs got shipped overseas, and if you have no economic heart, no economic blood in your community, the community is gonna fail. Okay.
Yeah, got a little excerpt from an article here. Hold on. Addressing specifically some of the points that you brought up. So I got from this particular article, it says, a frequently untold story of American life is that by the 1950s, The United States actually had a thriving black middle class. Black business ownership peaked during the years between the end of the Second World War and the start of the Great Society. Every city with any significant black population hosted a black business district where primarily black clientele spent their money within their own community. Black home ownership was likewise just as high at this point. I also have statistics demonstrating that the actual policies that they instituted during LBJ's administration directly prohibited like a woman having a man in the house to actually get the benefits there. But first, let me just get the actual rates, statistics of children and wedlock in households. All right, so from 1890 to 1950, Black women had a higher marriage rate than white women. And in 1950, just 9% of Black children lived without a father. By 1960s, the Black marriage rate had declined, but remained close to the white marriage rate. In other words, the 1960s. All right, so
I need a specific. Richard Nixon became president in '69.
Yeah,
so
no, this is like 1960. So in other words, despite open racism and widespread poverty, strong Black families used to be the norm. All right, so by the mid 1980s, Black fatherlessness like skyrocketed. Today, only about 44% of Black children have a father in the home. In unison, the rate of Black out of wedlock births went from about 24% in '64 to over 70% in '94, just under where it is today. One contributor family breakdown, which soon spread to the poor and working class white family, may have been welfare expansion. Cash welfare in meager form existed since 1935. However,
can I ask you something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, if whites received welfare on a higher rate than Blacks, why weren't their families impacted by this breakdown of marriage as well?
Well, it's not at a higher rate. So the total number of white people that are on welfare is higher than Black people, but that's only because there are way more white people in the country than Black people. So I looked at one of the statistics, one of the more recent statistics, about just under 40% of welfare recipients are white, and about a similar number are Black. But if you take into
do you have the stats of that era though? Because we're speaking of welfare during the initial '60s.
Oh, during the 60s?
Because this is the thing. In the welfare benefits in the 60s, they greatly benefited whites. Actually, I guess you could actually even argue that the way the welfare policies were proposed, it was proposed in a way to harm Black folks. But welfare as a whole, if you look at America over the last 100 years, when it was a superpower from the 1900s to the 2000s, it had welfare for most of its period, except that period after World War II, which is when you're saying that the Black family was at its pinnacle. But the thing is, the white family was also at its pinnacle. It was a post-World War II era. Now, when it tanked during the 60s, yeah, sure, maybe families broke up. It could have been, she wanted some food stamps, so she kicked the dude out. Or it could have been that the cops arrested him for loitering or for smoking pot. Okay, but regardless, the fact is that in that same era, a much larger thing happened. That's when all the industry in the cities, which our people were located in, started being sent overseas. All the jobs were sent away. The white folks moved out. And then also, hold on, let me just explain something. In that same era, physical barriers were built. The highway systems were built in a way that would segregate the communities. It made it really difficult for minority communities to even travel outside of their small neighborhoods. In Patterson itself, our town is surrounded 2 points by a river, a highway system on the third point. We're locked in the triangle. It's like an open air prison. Things were designed. You can't. Wait.
Are you telling me that you physically can't leave the area that you're living in?
You can, but it's actually very arduous. It's difficult.
What do you mean it's arduous and difficult? You can physically drive in and out of the neighborhood. I lived in North Jersey for most of my life. I'm in Central
Yeah.
Jersey right now. There
Most of
are
us
no
don't have
physical
cars.
barriers.
Most of us don't have cars because there's
You can
no
take-
jobs in the town because
You
they all
can-
got shit.
You can literally take public transportation in and out, but that's neither here nor
Sure.
there. No, that's neither here nor there. During that same
It
time
absolutely
period, like
is.
during the height of Jim Crow, there was like more black-owned businesses, including banks and stores, all types of black-owned businesses during the height of Jim Crow. You want to say, oh well, there's discrimination against black people and black men getting arrested is why there's no men in the home right now. But the fact of the matter is, during times of higher discrimination, where people were literally getting hunted down and lynched, black families actually had a higher rate of legitimacy than white families. They were like higher rates of marriage among black women than among white women. There were more children and among black families that grew up with fathers in the household. All of that didn't start to change until the years following the welfare programs that were literally paying women not to have men in the home. And then following that, then you started having the breakdown of family structure. And I also have statistics right here in front of me that's showing the correlation between having I'll let you talk. Let me talk.
Okay.
Let me talk. All right. So I actually have statistics here showing that having a single parent household vastly increases the chances that a child growing up in that will end up having drug problems, will end up not completing education, will not move up economically, and vastly increases their chances of ending up in prison, especially if they're a boy, if they're a male. And this is across the board. Like if you just control for race,
I absolutely agree.
And what my point is that it's disproportionately affecting black communities, because when these programs were instituted, when they were started being greatly expanded, it was mainly black people that were signing up for this stuff because they were, at that time, they were a bit economically disadvantaged compared to the rest of the country. Now, I have statistics for black immigrants that are coming from other countries like Nigeria, Haiti, Jamaica. And now, hold on, let me bring this up right now. So it's
the black immigrants that
just,
can afford a plane ticket, right? That can afford to start a new life, right?
Can afford to start a new life, and then once they come to America, once they come to America,
like I said, that can't even leave their own town.
All right.
People can't even leave their own town, and you're talking about people that travel through planes
and I
that have no trauma, people that have no historical trauma.
Historical trauma. I agree
with you. I agree with you when you say that losing a parent in the family really hampers your chances of success in life. The thing is, you're saying that a guy who's out in the corner slinging dope, selling guns, is scared to fraud a paper so that him and his girl could get food stamps. You're telling me that they're scared to put some fraud on food stamps when they're out doing way crazier stuff. When I'm telling you that it's literally documented. I can pull up the stats right now of how many men got arrested prior to 1969 and after 1969. I can also show you how many businesses, factories that employed hundreds of thousands of city folks were shipped overseas in the same era. The same era that these welfare benefits that you're saying happen, these welfare benefits happen in direct correlation to all these corporations offshoring. Now, like I'm saying, the welfare of the 60s was our second wave of welfare. That all those benefits went towards white people. These new projects were built. They weren't those high density high rises. They were 2 or 3 floors. They had yards. They were built out in the suburbs. They were more like townhouses. And African Americans got stuck in the old 1930s projects.
You're talking about the Great Society, LBJ's programs that were specifically targeted at black voters, right around that time, where the vast majority of black voters started voting.
I'm talking about a little bit after with Richard Nixon.
You're talking about as far as
because Richard Nixon became president is exactly when incarceration rates started skyrocketing. That's when literally the black men started disappearing from their families. It was all Richard Nixon, the war on drugs. They criminalized petty behavior, like chilling in front of the block. They'll just lock you up for that. And then it's just, there's no jobs in the town. Like, nobody wants to hire you outside of town. All the factories went away. You start slinging dope.
These programs and that. Look, these programs and the demographic changes that came with it happened before Nixon's administration. We're talking about LBJ's administration. And you're talking about all these jobs and everything going offshore, overseas and everything. Up until that point, before the civil rights movement, the Black people had higher employment rate, not because, oh, these big transnational corporations, but because they actually had their own businesses. They had their own businesses. All right, so
the civil rights movement was what year? Like or what era? Early 60s, mid 60s, early 60s, 65 or so.
Started in the
war on
50s
drugs
through
was
the 60s.
a direct response to that.
Yeah, war on, I'm not saying.
It's like it's like a one step forward, two steps back thing.
Okay, war on drugs might be a contributing factor, but as far as like the increased crime rates, the actual increase in violent crime, like Black people aren't just being arrested because they're smoking dope. Like there's higher rates of actual violent crime than the Black community, and I'm giving you statistics explaining how that increased, where that came from. Now you keep on talking about, oh, they're arresting people for sitting on the porch. Look,
right.
So I'm saying the welfare benefits actually financially incentivize single parenthood. Actually paying before that era, if a woman got pregnant, they had to have shotgun weddings because the state wouldn't come in and subsidize a single mother that got knocked up. They would have a father there, and they would force the boy to marry her on the threat of their life.
And you think that's a good relationship?
I'm not saying that it's a good relationship. What I'm saying is,
that has no bearing. A marriage has no bearing on whether a family succeeds. Just the two parents being together does.
Yeah,
the marriage is something symbolic. It has no meaning.
Yes, it has no meaning. But these programs actually financially incentivize them not to have men in their home. Like right here, like I'm reading this. It says about 1/3 of Americans aged 18 to 60 report that they personally know someone was not married for fear of losing means-tested benefits.
And it's so easy to just fake a paper, say the guy doesn't live with you. She's not gonna. Like, come on! It's such a joke for a woman to kick out the man she loves. For a woman to kick out the man she loves for a few bucks, so she could just send him to her aunt's house. And when the government comes, checks out the house, and then bring him back. Come on! You're telling me this happened billions
they literally have means-tested benefits. They base off of your household income. They have means of checking your household income. If it's above, okay.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for a great lightning round. We appreciate your fire and your engagement. We will now begin round 3, the audience question and answer round. We invite our audience to submit questions for the debaters. Each participant will be given the chance to respond to each question uninterrupted. Audience, please submit your questions now. As we bring up our audience questions, we'd like to ask for your support for our continued growth by donating to our Cash App, $, The Great Debate League. We also invite you to check us out on our YouTube channel, Great Debate League Inc., and become a member of our Patreon page. We are on Instagram, and you can subscribe to our podcast on Spotify and iHeartRadio. We will now take our first audience question. Jony, you said that welfare policies did negatively impact Black families. Is this a concession? You have 1 minute and 30 seconds to respond.
Not at all. It's not a concession, because I said those specific welfare policies pushed by later administrations. The question that we're talking about is a more general statement. The way welfare policies were implemented, welfare as a whole benefits Americans, especially today. You know, I earned $41K last year and I still receive food stamps. And I'm with my family. She didn't kick me out. Like, come on. It's like, come on, it's a joke.
All right. And now for our next question. Kimani, can you definitively state that welfare drove Black men from their homes, or were there other factors? You have 1 minute and 30 seconds.
There are other factors that come into play with it. As far as I don't want to get into all the details. I did research on it, but there are other contributing factors just across the board, not just in the Black community, as far as like increased rates of out of wedlock births and whatnot, but particularly in poor communities or lower middle class, where the amount of welfare benefits that they get depends on what their income is. Yeah, the illegitimacy rates are significantly higher. Although for the most part, from what I've been able to see, as far as the numbers go, yeah, it's mostly in poor communities. It seems like pretty much the lower the economic bracket is, the less likely couples are to be married, and the less likely they are to actually have both parents in the home. But like I said, there have been increasing rates across the board, across all ethnic groups of like out of wedlock marriages, but it's mostly on a socioeconomic basis. And the thesis that I'm saying is because of the relative like poverty of Black communities starting when these programs started, is disproportionately affected Black communities.
Thank you. If welfare incentivized single parents, why did it not negatively impact non-Black users in the same capacity? I think that's what that's saying. I'll repeat.
Yeah.
You got it? Okay. You can go ahead and take that question as well. Come on. All right. If welfare incentivized single parents, why did it not negatively impact non-Black users in the same capacity?
Because Black people.
1 minute and 30 seconds.
Yeah, because more Black people per capita are on welfare than like white people. So like looking at the statistics, about to a third, 40% of our welfare recipients are white, and it's about at the same levels for Black people. But considering the fact that Black people only make up about 13 to 15% of the population in the United States, that means it's like a disproportionate amount of Black people on this. So it doesn't affect the same percentage of white people or other ethnicities the way it does Black.
Thank you. The same question goes to you, Jony. If welfare incentivized single parents, why did it not negatively impact non-Black users in the same capacity? You have 1 minute and 30 seconds.
I don't believe that it did incentivize single parenthood. Honestly, I don't see how adding an additional family member, an additional person to feed, would reduce your chances of getting welfare benefits.
All right. And now for our final question. Kimani, when you mentioned, we'll ask another one as well for you, Jony. Kimani, when you mention Nigerians, do you have the stats on how many Nigerians who immigrate here have a post-secondary education and what their financial backgrounds are before they immigrate here? You have 1 minute and 30 seconds.
I don't have that data right up in front of me at the moment. I just kind of got it as some supplementary data just to kind of compare like Black Americans who come into the country from outside of the culture and comparing them to like averages of the domestic population, because the big running thesis right now is that Black people in America are doing poorly because of systemic racism. But if that were the case, Black people across the board would have a hard time succeeding. And that's just not true. So when I was about to go into the stats that I do have here, from this excerpt from this article, it says as of 2020, the median U.S. household income is about $60,000 per year. For white households, the median income is around $66,000, while Black American homes are around $44,000 a year. That's a massive gap between the two races. However, households comprising of immigrants that come from predominantly Black countries, this isn't the case. So just to look at the median incomes for uh, uh, immigrants from Ghana, they have about 69,000 is their median income. Nigerians is 68, with 25% enjoying a net worth of over 100,000 a year. Trinidadians and Tobago Americans, 62,000. Jamaican Americans, 62. Haitian Americans, 57. Well above the median for native-born African Americans, and in many cases higher than the median for white Americans.
All right, thank you for that. And for you, Jony, how does mass incarceration play into this conversation? You have 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Mass incarceration completely plays into every aspect of this whole conversation. It's not the sole, but it's the primary factor in which the economic blood and life force from the African American community, most specifically in cities, that's how everything was drained. You start off, you lock somebody up or you give them a ticket, they can't afford to pay the ticket, and everything starts just snowballing. Then before long, you got to feed your family, like Kimani's saying, strong families, a guy will do anything to feed his family. And if Kimani, like Kimani is saying, if this guy is like, if he can't get welfare benefits because he's with his family and there's no jobs. Kimani, do you agree that jobs en masse left
This is
the
actually,
cities?
you'll have to ask him that outside of this debate. This
I'm
is
sorry.
actually your turn to answer the question.
Mass incarceration completely plays into every factor. That's how everything began. That's how the economic drain begins.
All right. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Thank you so much, audience, for posing your questions. We will now move to closing statements. Each participant will provide an uninterrupted closing statement. We will hear the affirmative closing statement from Kimani White. You have 3 minutes.
Yeah, Jony is kind of focusing on the whole mass incarceration is the reason why the Black family is in decline and whatnot. But like, even though we have like the war on drugs, and that's been a contributing factor, the fact of the matter is that Black people are being incarcerated at higher rates for violent crimes and homicides. It's not just sitting on the porch or having drugs or getting pulled over for moving violations and stuff like that. It's actual hard crimes. And the contributing factor to that's actually causing that is because a lot of these households, starting in the mid 20th century, starting following these welfare programs, you had a precipitous drop in the number of households that had a father in it. And studies are showing that that especially when it comes with raising boys, if there's not a father or father figure in the household, particularly their biological father in the picture, which is increasingly the case in the years following 1964, 65. There's fewer and fewer actual biological fathers in the household. They have increased rates of like delinquency, increased rates of drug use, violent crime, far lower chances of actually moving up socioeconomically. The stats aren't quite as severe for girls, but for boys in particular, it's really bad. So you end up having all of these young Black men and everything ending up in jail, not because the government is going after them more for like petty, silly crimes, but because they're committing crimes at greater rates because they didn't have guidance from father figures who cared about them in their households. That's the root cause of it. And that's my closing statement.
All right. Thank you. All right. Thank you so much, Kimani. Now we will move to the closing statement for Jony Espinal arguing the negative. Jony, please unmute yourself and you have 3 minutes.
All right. So post-World War II, life was great. It was great for white America, great for Black America. It was great for everybody for about 20 years. Afterwards, capitalism has ever higher demands for profits. Capitalism demands more and more. Standards of living went up, but at a point we just The capitalists didn't want to raise wages. They didn't want to pay anymore. They started sending jobs overseas. Cities started collapsing. Economy started collapsing. Corporations sprung up, took away, destroyed the downtown districts. You know, it's a story. It's a story we all know. I just hope after this debate, everybody looks up Richard Nixon. Look up Richard Nixon and the Black family. Look up anything about Richard Nixon. You'll see exactly when all these problems really kicked into and it sort of institutionalized high gear. It's not just a mass incarceration. It's the offshoring of jobs. It's the redlining. It's the segregation. It's the highway projects being built to benefit certain people. It's the infrastructure projects being built to benefit certain people. Everything started downhill in the end of the 1960s. Kimani says it was because food stamps, food stamps and some housing, some Section 8, but obviously there was crime. How did the crime happen? The crime happened because there was no jobs. There was economic suffering. People did what they had to do. They declared the war on drugs. The same thing happened. Crime skyrocketed into prohibition. Same communities where those Black folks lived in the 70s. That's where the Italians were in the 20s and 30s, just as violent. It's a never-ending cycle. It's like systems set in place in certain communities. And whenever you look at these communities, immediately outside of these densely packed cities, there's always a suburb community that has higher average income than that core community that's being drained. Growing up in my town in Paterson, New Jersey, the only white people we saw lived in the surrounding edges of our city, and they were the cops, the teachers, the government administration. People in the actual city, all we could work in is our local bodega. We get lucky, it can be a janitor in the school. There just wasn't any opportunities. And that's what leads to crime, the lack of opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We appreciate both of you, Kimani White and Jony Espinal, for participating in the Great Debate League. As always, we have had a very critical discussion on an important issue in our community, and we were able to learn from both of our presenters. Thank you for our audience for paying attention, engaging, and asking questions. We now ask that you please use our scorecard to let us know how you scored each participant's performance. This is a quick form that should only take you 2 minutes to complete. Please score each debater's performance and how well they did with presenting fact-based arguments, subject matter expertise, persuasiveness, elocution, and address rebuttals. Thank you again for watching and participating. We ask for your support to keep this program running. You may donate to our Cash App, $ The Great Debate League, so that we can continue to evolve. Also, please check us out on YouTube and subscribe. And again, we invite you to become a member of our Patreon page. We will go live again momentarily in our post-debate analysis, where you will hear from the Great Debate League commissioners on how well the debaters performed tonight. And that will start shortly. Have a great night, and remember to speak the truth.